And if you would like, very good. Thank you everyone for joining us today for today's webinar, sponsored by Manufacturing Works and being presented by our member Mead & Moore, and which will be presented by Scott Holter, who's with the consulting services practice leader. A couple of things. Today is a part of a two-part series on ERP systems, and everyone knows that they're very complex pieces of software, and really they're there to help you make better decisions in business. So our focus today and on Thursday is really to help you select better modules, or the correct modules, or to select the proper ERP system for your business. So this isn't about any particular system at all. This is about approximately 90 systems. As a matter of fact, Mead & Moore has been developing this online system of theirs for about 15 years, and they've used their customers as a resource that have been going through this process. They have over 90 ERP systems loaded into their system. And again, this is a tool that you and your team can use to make sure that you're making an informed decision based on a product that is most likely to be the correct choice for your company and your strategy. So the two parts, the first part will be if you already have an ERP system and you're looking to add a module, this first part will be about selecting or going through the questions that your team should ask to make sure that the module that you're going to turn on will be solving the problems that you're trying to solve. And the second part, which would be on Thursday, which will really take a look at those of you who either have an ERP system or don't have one, and are either looking to change your ERP or looking to get to the first one, and it will kind of take you through the entire process of the selection process. So a couple of things for housekeeping. We will be monitoring the chat box, and feel free to type something in at any time. We do encourage you, if you'd like to unmute yourself and turn on your video, either or, and go ahead and ask a question if you prefer to do it that way, as opposed to typing. This webinar is for you. So if you feel comfortable enough, feel free to ask the questions most relevant to you. Also, we will be recording, as you can see, and we will be posting this on our YouTube channel directly after, or soon after. I do want to make one other introduction before I go back to Scott. The sponsor for all of our technology-related webinars and events is Team Neo, and specifically the Smart Manufacturing Cluster of Northeast Ohio, of which we ourselves are both a proud and very active member. And so here to tell us a little bit more about the Smart Manufacturing Cluster is Erica Fitzpatrick. She is the Program Manager for Industry and Innovation at Team Neo.
Great, thank you, Ron. We are so proud and excited to be hosting these webinars, or to be sponsoring these webinars. So just a little bit about Team Neo. So Team Neo is a private nonprofit economic development organization that accelerates business growth and job creation throughout 18 counties in Northeast Ohio. As a designated Jobs Ohio network partner, we align and amplify local economic development efforts in the region's 18 counties. We conduct research and data analysis to inform local conversations and influence solutions, and we market the Northeast Ohio region. We work to increase access to jobs, education, and training for the region's 4.3 million people. We do this to build a more vibrant regional economy, one that's more talented, equitable, and competitive, innovative, resilient, and prosperous. And then a little bit about our Smart Manufacturing Cluster. As Ron mentioned, we're happy to have Manufacturing Works as a member of our cluster. So the Smart Manufacturing Cluster of Northeast Ohio accelerates the growth and competitiveness of Northeast Ohio's economy through smart manufacturing implementation and innovation that leverages the region's rich manufacturing heritage, unique assets, and talented workforce. We lead the development of innovation roadmaps and serve as the platform for the regional manufacturing blueprint to accelerate adoption and maximize the value of technology. We connect knowledge, experience, tools, and networks with manufacturers to generate demand, increase productivity, spur product innovation, and develop talent and resources necessary to drive technology and implementation and innovation. I'll share our websites for the Smart Manufacturing Cluster and for Team Neo in the chat. And we appreciate y'all being here and learning about these systems. I'll hand it back over to you, Ron. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Eric. And for those of you who are interested and should be interested, take a look at their website, because there are a lot of exciting things that we work on in the cluster and bring together with a lot of manufacturers like yourselves and many of the support members. So now I'm going to do a quick introduction of Scott Holter from Mead & Moore. A couple of things. Number one, he's a local. He's Brecksville High School back in the day, and went to study at Cornell on industrial engineering. And then a little bit later on, got his MBA at Case Western Reserve Weatherhead School of Management. On the business side, operations, worked a lot in operations for Westinghouse and Farrell Corporation, and then went to become a consultant with Magnet. And all that time also was a 25-year APICS instructor. So we have a lot of good background with us today. So Scott, I'm going to turn it over to you, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. Good. Nice to meet everyone, and thanks for joining on this webinar today. I'll clear the chat box there. But one of the questions that I thought would be, and Ron suggested that we start with, is, oh my gosh, ERP, how much is this going to cost? And so one of the things we wanted to hit right out of the gate was that there is a lot of funding for improvement activities and improvement initiatives and also even some of the new purchase of enterprise software. GLTAC and MATAC are the Great Lakes Trade Adjustment Assistance Center and the Mid-Atlantic Trade Adjustment Assistance Center. And if you can demonstrate any impact by foreign trade, they've provided some funding for some of our clients. The MEP centers locally here in Cleveland, Magnet, in Western Pennsylvania, Catalyst Connection in the NWIRC, down in Dayton, Fastlane. Most recently, they've had some COVID relief monies that have been used for some of these projects. Ron had asked me to add two that I'm not that familiar with, Ohio Tech Cred and SBDC. Ron, I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, but can you talk to those at all?
All I will say for the group is that if you are going down this path and you're working on either improving your current ERP or looking at something, just send me an email and I can get you connected. The important part is there are the important part is there are some funding sources, and this is pretty unusual to have this opportunity. So sometimes you can have 50 hours of consulting time paid for by an outside agency.
So, a good part of what we're going to talk about today is getting a better experience with your existing tools. And then if at some point you have to throw in the towel and you need new systems, we'll talk about more that journey on Thursday. But with respect to the improved use of existing tools, we really, as a practice here at Mead & Moore, went back to Harrington's old quote about that measurement is the first step that leads to control and eventually to improvement. And if you can't measure something, you can't understand it. If you can't understand it, you can't control it. And if you can't control it, you can't improve it. It's a very technocratic view of the world, but we felt that it made sense. And we got the idea really starting with a client about 20 years ago. It's a local client that's pretty well known, but I'm not going to name them just to protect the innocent. But the namesake of the company said to us, I know if my machines are being used, the ones that we invested are being used. I walk the shop floor, I see them running, I see materials stacked up in front of them, and I get machine utilization graphs and charts. And that was a real tipping point for us. He said, but I don't know if the people are using my expletive ERP system. All I know is that the software vendors told me that our turns would increase from 2 to 4 or even 6, and now they've dropped to 1. And it was really with that insight that he gave us that we came back to him with this analysis. And utilization is usually measured in time, and we knew that time that people were logged on wasn't going to be useful. So we decided to use the requirements, the attributes that the company should be using as the unit of measure. And what we found, and they were weighted, but this is just a summary scorecard, but we found that we identified in the areas of inquiry related to his inventory turns, that they needed 137 different features to be using in their ERP system. In general, we found that their current system only supported 102 of them. So there was 35 practices or techniques or data elements that the system just didn't have. So we gave the system a score, or an effectiveness or a fit score of 74%. What we also found was they were only using 70 of the 102. And so depending on which you want to use as the denominator, that's really a 69% utilization of software that's only a 75% fit. And so this was sort of a maiden voyage for us into a whole other series of scorecarding. This was from a client that was much larger. It had us go through an end-to-end view of their business. And they were dead set that they needed to go buy a new system. In their case, we identified over 1,100 requirements, of which their system was an 84% fit, doing nearly 950 of them, but they were using less than half of them. And so, not sure if you want to call this savings or maybe cost avoidance, but this client 10 years ago, we convinced them to retain this system, that this was at least a good solid B grade ERP system, and CRM was included in there. You see the marketing and Salesforce automation, and just make better use of it. And they spent probably $100,000, but they had budgeted $600,000 for a new system. So whether you want to call that real savings or not, but the good news is this company is still using this system today that they had planned to throw out about 10 years ago. Thank you for the, yeah, if there's any three-letter acronyms, don't hesitate to stop me. It's part of the nature of our business. I also wanted to, and I'm going to jump off and show you a before and after picture of a local company, somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 to $10 million. They're an assembler of instrumentation and flow control devices. They had been running on their current system for about 10 years. They weren't they never felt like they fully implemented it or weren't satisfied with it. And I think what I would like to do here is escape out. And just show a quick. So this is a before picture. And we gave this company a scorecard. And I'll see if I can blow this up a little bit.
And let me just throw in for everyone that what Scott is about to show you are outputs from the online tool that they offer.
Yeah. And what this showed was this client was running an ERP system that we're familiar with, but is deeply researched in our database, called Intuitive. They're on the latest version, so these two columns will show the same. We surveyed their business in the areas mostly related to planning, scheduling, shop floor control. And we found that the current version that they're on, which is the latest, is a 91.9% fit, meaning it's got very good to excellent capabilities to support their business. What we found, though, all these areas that are highlighted in red are areas of less than 60% utilization. You see in demand forecasting, not even being used, production scheduling, not being used, work orders, only a third of the capabilities being used. And again, I don't want to say the total capabilities, but the capabilities that they agreed they should be using once we explained it to them. And so they were down to a 24% utilization. And in effect, we're using the system like QuickBooks. If we go now to the after picture, which was taken about a year and a half later. you'll see that the software fit changed slightly because we levied a few new requirements. So it actually went up a little bit. But notice after working through some improvement exercises, we got them to use forecasting. We got them to upgrade their routing data. They turned on MRP and we're using a good bit of it. We still haven't gotten them into the production scheduling area, but we did spend a lot of time with how they use the shop floor control, and they're using 90% of it, of which is an 88% fit. So in total, they're using now, they've gone from 24% utilization of their software to 70%. And what it's enabled them to do is grow their business without adding subsequent headcount, especially in the office. So that's we wanted to show a before and after scorecard where we've leveraged this utilization analysis coming out of the tool that we've built and the framework that we'll show you. So let me go back to, there we go. So what the roadmap that we've developed over the years is start off with what are your goals and objectives. Again, not using your software isn't an objective, that's a way to get there. But what are you trying to accomplish? Like that business owner who said they wanted to improve his inventory turns. Then develop an ERP strategy, define business processes, define your detailed ERP requirements, then compute the fit of your system and your level of utilization. If the fit is good, then monitor your utilization just like any other asset in your production facility. Maybe annually, maybe you bake it into your ISO audits, maybe you bake it into your financial services audits. And then as you go through it and initiate improvement activities, certainly you want to, before you dive headstrong into them, look at the costs and benefits and measure those and see if there's any, if you're going to be in what costs you might be incurring, and then seek out and close those gaps that we'll talk about. Ron, go ahead.
Two things. Number one, I think that the display is smaller again. I'm not sure what
sorry
they call
about
it.
that.
But the other thing, and probably even definitely more importantly, is that, Scott, all of this 7-step roadmap, this is included in the online tool, right? So they don't have to.
We're going to show that next.
Oh, good. Okay, very good.
Yep.
Good segue.
Yep. I didn't want to give them the big long slideshow. I just wanted to show it in one slide. And so we've embedded this process into our a framework that we call the ERP Navigator. And this is the login page. It's ironically at mmpackageselection.com. And I'm just going to log in here. And it takes me to a client that we are actively working with over in Western Pennsylvania through this kind of journey. And so we're going to start here. And we typically would, rather than coming in and taking notes on Word documents or anything like that, we step the client through a series. We obviously take a facility tour, and then we take a 30,000 foot look at the client to learn about them, looking at their organizational structure, at their customers and their markets, and some of the challenges that are presented by those customers. In this case, this client happens to be heavy automotive with a lot in the recreation and hobby, like the RV industry. Learn about their products and services and manufacturing processing technologies. If anyone knows about the St. Mary's area of Pennsylvania, you could probably guess they're in powdered metals. Get into their purchases, aspects of those, just some of the challenges, who the regulatory bodies are that they're beholden to. And all the time we're taking notes. The client can be taking notes in here. And once now we start talking about what are some of the business level goals and objectives. Why would you invest money in getting better use out of your ERP system? And working with this client, we documented with their executive team and some key managers in the first day, improve their overall knowledge of their visual ERP system, being able to better cross-reference their customer part numbers, improving the accuracy of their bills and routings, using scheduling, automating processes and reducing duplicate data entry. You can see we described it. We put in their their priority level on it, just the overall paperwork reduction, and improving their output of KPIs. So this is something that is a living, breathing goals and objectives setting. And once we had done that, then we said, let's take a look at the areas and topics that you might want to work through as part of your journey with improving the use and satisfaction with your ERP system. So in their case, we did spend some time with them on some system-wide features, how they use their multi-company and multi-site features, their personal productivity features, with regards to how they manage tasks and use searches, but more down to the functionality. We left out customer relationship management. That just wasn't something that they wanted to commission any sort of analysis or improvement on, but we spent quite a bit of time on quoting, estimating, and how they process sales orders. So that was all put in scope. And these numbers here are some percentage weights in terms of the management team's relative importance of that subject matter. But notice for them being a manufacturer, contract manufacturer, doing things like retail and point of sale was not important to them. We got into engineering, supply chain, manufacturing functions, quality management, even asset management from a maintenance management standpoint, and how they manage their assets, as well as some service incident and case management relative to complaints. And so once we had the scope, and the kickoff and the scope took about a day, then the real work began with walking them through a series of attributes that we feel are what we would call best practices. So for example, just digging down into engineering, product master data, getting into your product structures or your bill of materials. If you recall, one of the objectives that they had was improving the accuracy and precision of their costing. Well, one way that they thought that they could do that, and that we elicited from them, is they said that their tooling costs were actually as much as their raw material costs, but their tooling is expensed. And so we wanted to so we set out the objective of, we want to be able to put tools in the bill of material. That's a required feature for them. It supports this objective of more precise costing. We know that their current version of their current visual ERP system does this, and we'll get into how we know that, but they aren't using that feature. So that is a very detailed, granular example of what we call a functionality gap. They've got a need, their system does it, and they aren't using it. Let me see if I can find a couple others here, reference designators. So that I don't want to go too deep into the weeds there, with each and every one of them with you, because that might not apply to you. But the point of it is, just in the area of how we structure components in the bill of material, we surveyed them according to 17 criteria. Similarly, in the areas of, let's go into manufacturing and MRP, just in the demand sources, how they incorporate forecasts in there. Here's a case where we felt this was a vitally important, strategically important requirement. The system does support it, and they were using it. So there's not a gap there, but we did find that they are not using a feature called orders consume forecasts, and they were double counting some things. So it wasn't a deal breaker. We waited as a nice to have. Their system would support that capability, but they aren't using it. Again, another functionality gap. And so when this was all done and we had surveyed their business, walked through their processes, looked at how they're doing things in purchasing, receiving, inventory management. In inventory management, we got into things like location control. They move, bad practice, and they admit this, but because of their space constraints right now, they move WIP out offline, and they need to be able to track WIP when it's not at the machine by location. There's a bolt-on product available with their ERP system that would provide it, but they don't own it, so they aren't using it. So when we wrapped up the analysis, the discovery, the requirements gathering, the process reviews, then it's a simple matter of coming over here and saying, let's run the scorecard and see how you're doing based on this project that we started in April. I'll run a summary by topic and take the risk of, as Ron joked last night, it's always dangerous running with live data. But in this particular case, what I can tell you is that quite a bit better. Let me go to the next page. A longer report because it's we surveyed so much more of their business. But what we found here similarly was that they've got a 92% fit of their software. If they upgrade to the latest version, they can increase that potential or capacity to a 94% fit. But again, they're only using just a little bit more than half of the capabilities that they agree they should be using. They're not using anything in the service, or they're only using about a third in the service incident area. And you can see all of these highlighted scores are ones that are below our threshold for excellent use. Ron?
Just a quick question, Scott. What are some of the reasons people don't upgrade their ERP systems that you guys have heard about?
Yeah, good question. And sometimes it's a good reason. There's the old joke about pioneers are the ones who take the arrows. And if the latest version is new and maybe it's on a new technology platform or something like that, I'm not a big proponent of client being on the bleeding edge of new technology for sure. Other cases, clients, if the software isn't a great fit and it's not one they're committed to for the long term, some have gone off of maintenance and support, not taken any more upgrades and banked that money for a few years to pay for a replacement down the road. But more often than not, and one of the downsides or one of the reasons, I'll call it a negative reason that companies don't upgrade is if they heavily customized it, sometimes that causes them to be version locked because they would have to repay for those customizations to be redone. And those are often cases where they'll come to us and say, and have us conduct a study of, should we repay for those customizations and stay on the same platform, or would we be better off just jumping and switching platforms altogether? Okay. And as a firm that doesn't sell software and doesn't have an answer in our back pocket that we get a commission on, we're neutral observers, but observers with expertise that can help with that.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Sure. So this is the scorecard. Unlike the last one, I don't have the after picture, but we do have work beginning in July or August to help increase this level of utilization. And in this particular case, because my staff and I are not experts on Infor Visual, we're going to work with the folks who know that, I'll call them the package mechanics, as part of a three-legged stool to support the client. So by no means are we going to hold ourselves out as someone who knows each and every ERP system out there. But as a research firm, we know what they can and can't do and can help a client understand what they can and can't do without being fearful that they're being sold a bill of goods. So I'll close that down. And I think that's the improvement roadmap. What I wanted to show you was, so one of at the end of that session, the client said, okay, what do we need to work on? And we said, well, I think what we ought to start with, oh, Ron, you there? Question?
Yeah, I real quick, just from what you said, just an add-on, when you're doing the assessment, and the way you had explained it, you have upwards of up to 2,500 different questions if you're all encompassing, but you can ask a lot of questions. But do you ever have the software vendor involved in that process also? Do they ever join in on the meetings at the appropriate
usually
time?
After the fact, not the initial one, but they always will be involved. And we like to say that we help the clients manage the vendors. But we will get them involved, and we do have a company called Synergy Resources now involved here, who is the experts on the visual ERP system.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks. Good segue. So in this particular client, what they said, well, what do we start working on? You covered 2,500 attributes. Well, let's find those that we put the highest weight on, that your current system can do out of the box that you aren't using. Here's our working list. So this was a relatively short list, but this was our, I would call it the low-hanging fruit. We identified that these are really important features that our current system provides and we aren't using. Let's get an action plan to work on those. Then let's go down to the next level, the medium weight required. And they suggested, they said, why can't you multi-select? And that's an enhancement I'm going to put in our tool. But as you can see, the medium weight had quite a long working list of things that we need to do. And we're just parse this out to the user community and supervise the implementation of these features covering from inventory, shipping, MRP, scheduling, how they process work orders, incoming quality control. I mean, this is a very long action list when we list all of the requirements, but when you get just those that are the most critical, it's a much shorter list and very handleable. So part of our mission with this tool was to give clients and make it plain to them, what is our working list? And as we go back in, and if we turn on that we're now doing our physical counts with handheld devices, we'll go back in, check the current use box, and it'll disappear from our working list. So it's much more than just an assessment tool, but it is a project control tool as well.
You did mention this, Scott, but I just wanted to ask, so when you do these interviews with the company personnel and then you come back a little later, whatever that might be, so they're able to see like a progress. So if I were part of the management team and maybe not involved in this, but but I'm sponsoring it and I'm looking forward to it, the team that's doing this work would be able to come back to me and say, I'd like you to look at the picture over the last, every 6 months, you take another picture.
Yep.
Okay.
Very much so. And that comes right here, Ron, where all we would need to do is create what we call a new assessment point.
Okay. Okay.
And then where that shows up is right here. Right now we're on the initial assessment point because we're still in the before picture that started on April 6th. But once we firm this up and then we start generating some improvement, we'll create a new assessment point, take their temperature again, and then they'll see that the after picture. And Ron,
Okay.
you had mentioned, this is where I select our clients, and here's the big long list of clients. But what Ron had hinted at earlier, this is where we store the vendors. And so in this particular client's case, their vendor is Infor. And notice up here, no longer says define requirements, it says define answers. And so if I go to their package visual, version 9.2, which is the latest we have in our database, back to that one particular attribute, tracking of WIP by location requires an interfaced product. But if we go to one of their other products, Cloud Suite Industrial, which is known also as Sightline, that requires a modification in order to support that capability. So we've tracked, as you can see, just Infor, we've got 6 or 7, 8 vendors or 8 packages that are owned by Infor in our database. And you multiply that by, many multi-product vendors that we have in our database here. So our research is pretty complete for just about all manufacturers and distributors.
I'm glad you show that, because as a person who in the past has had some responsibility at being on teams where you look out to select an ERP system, we never had a tool this extensive. We might have identified 3 or 4 products, and then we would try to come up with our own list of strategic and important and nice to haves, but it was never as extensive as 15 years of building this system as.
Well, and it's 15 years of a journey, and we really started it because from 2000 to 2005 we were capturing all this information on a one-off basis per client and then storing it in spreadsheets, and we realized we had some data that was of value that we could use for the benefit of our clients.
How many times do you actually go into a question about something, you've covered many topics, but how many times have you ever got into something where really you felt like your Apex background was needed to, you almost needed to identify or explain a little bit better to the team why that particular question was included in your survey?
Yeah, good question, Ron. It comes in a lot, and we do, there's times that, I'm an Apex practitioner. While I work for an accounting firm, I'm not an accountant. And so there are two former controllers on our staff where if the accounting issues get difficult, I pull myself out, or I pull Kristen out, who doesn't have an accounting background, and we bring in Rome or Lisa. Conversely, if they start getting into some esoteric aspects of MRP or scheduling or supply chain, they'll say, Scott, I think we got to put you or Marty on this one because or Heather, because of your Apex backgrounds or ASQ backgrounds. Hey, Ron, we do have some good questions here.
Yes.
It says, how long does the initial assessment usually take to complete? Great question. And I don't, there's a joke about consultants that says every time we answer a question, we say it depends. We can get through a typical client, which is a small to mid-market manufacturer distributor, in a week. But I will tell you that no clients want us on site 5 days in a row anymore with all of the other things that they have going on. So we usually spread that time over the course of 3 to 4 weeks for the discovery and the analysis, then a week or two for the reporting and the analytics. And the on-paper analysis, whether it's a get better with our current system or pick a new system, 4 to 8 weeks is typically getting through that first phase of things. And it usually is driven by the client. And I mean this respectfully. They have businesses to run. They have product to get out the door. And so we try to do it in a way that minimizes the disruption. I see from Buck Rogers asking if this would be useful in selecting an ERP system. Absolutely. And that was actually how we started this program, is, as we jokingly call it, a technology dating service. And if I switch over to another client like D&W, which is a client we're working with in Elkhart, Indiana, which you might imagine they're slightly involved in the RV industry, they're in a selection mode. They're looking for a new ERP system. So rather than running that single package gap fit, we run the comparative reports. And
right,
so,
and we don't want to take too much away from our next section.
Yeah, that's gonna,
exactly,
and we're gonna, yeah, it's a good point. We'll show that. We'll leave that as a teaser, like in the old Batman cartoons. We'll cover that in the next episode.
I think there was, but yeah, that I'm glad you mentioned it, because the tool can be used both to fill the gap and to, yeah. There's another question here. There you go. Go ahead.
Oh, how do you handle the interviews when multiple people perform the same function at different facilities or even in the same facility? Great question. And it does make it harder. We love to get people who are doing the same function together if they're in the same facility. But it's very common for us to work with multi-divisional entities. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples. So locally here in Cleveland, you may have heard of MP Biomedicals over in Solon. So we worked with their Asia Pacific group, separate from their EMEA group, separate from their USA group, and surveyed their I'll call it their user base, and worked with them totally separately, and then put together kind of a joint force task team to represent all of them, and then created what we call a global or unified requirements set that covered the entire global entity. Same thing we did for another client, Catalyst Acoustics Group. Most closely, their closest to local plant here to Cleveland is in the Columbus area. But all of their different divisions were surveyed, including even a survey of just their corporate financials and sales. And then we built a unified profile at the end. So great question, and we deal with that. It's common, but it's not the majority of our situations. So I think we're done with that. And let me flip back to the PowerPoint. And slide and display.
Just while you're hunting for that, Scott, I just going to ask a quick question. You talked about people that work with, foreign trade, et cetera. Is a currency, multiple currencies, is that a big component now for ERP selection? Is that a...
It is, more and more companies have been dragged into, and it's one of the fun activities of working with more of the small and mid-market vis-a-vis some of my work experience with Faro and Westinghouse years ago, is we see some of those things that big companies have to deal with cascade down, 5-10 years later. And so one, yes, even the small market ERP systems are addressing the multi-currency needs, because even, a lot of our, I'll say mid-market clients have facilities in China, have facilities in Mexico, Latin America, Europe, absolutely. So we did that.
Thank you.
So, but today with the focus being on improvement, I would imagine that the companies that are using their ERP systems really well aren't ones that we spend, that come and visit us and say, hey, can you help? But we do think that sometimes ERP systems are a bit of a Rubik's Cube. And we really do try to get them to emphasize that the RP, requirements planning, is an important aspect of this. And that if you are just using the accounting modules for transactions, you might be better off just going and buying QuickBooks because it will be a lot cheaper. And that's a bit sarcastic, but the point of it is that we have various research has been done that shows today somewhere around 40%, a little over 40% of companies are very dissatisfied, fairly dissatisfied, or neutral with their ERP, CRM providers. And when you figure that that's your number one IT expenditure, neutral is not a ringing endorsement. And of that, around half of that 43% have a failure to launch. They don't even get started and they scuttle the project. And of those that do launch, a small majority go over budget, go over timeline, or maybe get less than their expected benefits. And a lot of this comes because of what we call gaps. And over time, you will find that software, while the software may seem good at the beginning, the business's demands change. We see this very commonly. Every one of these bullets is from a client example where their business model or their major process changes caused their software that had been adequate to no longer be adequate. We had a large, it's interesting, but when your name's on the door, the owner of a large business that was a metal processor decided that the family decided they wanted to purchase 5 small emerging electronics companies around the world. And they added all kinds of new requirements onto their ERP platform that it just couldn't support. We see domestic manufacturers expanding overseas, distributors acquiring manufacturing companies. This one was a spinoff of GrafTech. The capital equipment manufacturer one of our clients began servicing and repairing their equipment in the field, the customer's equipment with a field service capability. So just major business changes. One of my clients gave me this line. It's one of my favorite lines, and it was, we could really get some work done if it wasn't for our customers. And it was meant sarcastically by him to let the people know we have to adapt and work around our customers. But customers do levy a lot of requirements on the enterprise software systems, on CRM, on your website, on your ERP system for certain, with respect to how you package materials, label it, traceability requirements, and all those industry compliance issues. Regulatory agencies, while we love them that they help make sure that we have safe implants and safe medications and safe food, they also levy requirements on us as manufacturers and distributors that add cost, and they do add computing costs. So all of these standards and compliances do create gaps in software packages. One that is probably most commonly seen these days in the last couple of years, pre-COVID and into COVID, and I'll hit that question as soon as I see this, is the turnover of people. Systems that were implemented successfully, maybe implemented by a cadre of key employees. Those key employees maybe retire, get promoted, move on to other ventures, and they leave or retire. And the new people coming in, almost to unanimous report to us that they didn't get the same level of indoctrination and training that the initial team did. And so they're making it up as they go along. And with that, capabilities start to wade and use starts to decline. Ever consider integrating to different systems, or do they lean more towards getting one on the same platform? Boy, that's a great question, Beth. I'm going to say that we generally see, if it's a few number of entities, we'll tend to see companies try to standardize on one, sometimes two. So I would say the inclination from the outset tends to be integrating everybody onto the same set of systems. And I think that there's good merit in that for our typical small or mid-market type client. As our clients, as we move into the larger strata of our clients, and let's say that's one, which are fewer for us, but in the 250 million to $1 billion size, I think it almost is like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. It's a never-ending process, because just as you think that you're going to get everybody onto the same system, leadership goes out and does another acquisition. And so there's always one in the pipeline. And so in those types of companies where they're acquisition intensive, we've seen more acceptance of the having multiple platforms and then central repositories for reporting, either non-financial reports, in the form of what they call a data warehouse using business analytics, and then also the financial reporting. So I think because of the disruption that ERP and CRM changeovers involve, we're seeing a swinging of the pendulum away from thou shalt be all on the same system to acceptance of a couple. We can support a couple inside our company. So I know that sounds like an it depends answer, but I hope I gave you some ideas of what it depends on. Good question. Thank you. So what we do see is a lot of partial implementations, like the two examples that I showed you. Both of those, Catalyst and the other one that whose name I'm hiding because they're local and fairly well known, they implemented it first as an accounting system. And I say that somewhat derogatorily. The accounting functions are necessary but not sufficient. And what you saw was in all of those, they pretty much, they could enter orders and process shipments and get paid and apply cash and send out bills and all of those things. But when it came to the real meat and potatoes of manufacturing and distribution, they never really frosted the cake. We find that the configure, price, and quote areas are commonly not used at all, that they're using Excel or something like that. The pricing and contracts are managed in Word documents, or maybe they're on Teams or something, or in a document vault, but they're not populating the sales orders. We find that engineering change control is still done far too much on paper with signing parties. And the stuff that's near and dear to my heart as a practitioner and a teacher is that the Apex principled modules of capacity requirements and material requirements and finite and infinite scheduling are often done outside in Excel or on paper or what have you. So, and cycle counting from an inventory control standpoint. And some other difference makers get left on the sidelines, like business intelligence and analytics. And these three right here are great opportunities we've been seeing in the last couple of years of bringing the quality management, both the quality control and the quality system, into the fold. The maintenance management, especially with the Internet of Things and IoT sensors being made available to predict when equipment might need maintenance. And then the workflow management. And I think the folks at ServiceNow are on an advertising binge for their workflow tools. But a lot of these ERP and CRM systems do a great job with workflow management. We'll just kind of skip this, but this, if you want a set of our slides, we'll be happy to send this to you. But when these are some of the symptoms that we'll hear about that will normally point to an underutilized ERP system where they've got, excess inventory of some products and then shortages of others, lots of duplicate data entry, extensive management intervention, maybe low fill rates or unreliable delivery promises, overtime 1 week, idle time the next, expediting, inaccurate inventory. Again, another local company, the former VP of sales, now president, said, my goal for this project is to make sure our sales reps aren't blindsided when they go on a sales call. So those are some symptoms that we've seen. I think I've shown you this, in the example, but we've identified 4 types of gaps. The one is the functionality gap. That was the case where those software packages were a 92% fit, so they had an 8% functionality gap, where the software doesn't do quite what I need it to do. Maybe we need some formulation management and it just handles discrete bills of material. The ways to solve the functionality gaps, most companies know these, but we've kind of given a list here of least risk to highest risk. Upgrades, certainly, Ron, you asked that question earlier, can often, maybe the new version adds that feature, and we have that research available for our clients. Maybe you can purchase add-on modules from a software publisher. There are often independent software vendors that write embedded modules or bolt-ons that require a separate server or database. And then we get into kind of bending the software. Can we use workflow management tools to orchestrate some of this without us customizing it? Or we might have to go a step further in risk and customize within the software's tool set. The second to last resort is source code modification. That will tend to version lock you or require you to pay for it the next time you want to do an upgrade. But like surgery, we still view replacement as a last resort. And then we have utilization gaps are when we're not using those available features. And this is a case where maybe it was accounting driven or operations and sales didn't want to be involved. Maybe information sharing isn't pursued. Oftentimes we see a lack of foundational knowledge. And so the utilization gaps are more solved not by software, but by enlightenment, illuminating those idle features that oftentimes the company doesn't know are available. Certainly providing the foundational education, APEX classes, ASQ classes, community college and nearby universities. Education being different from training. Certainly the vendor or software publisher will have a role in providing that. What buttons do I push to make this happen? How do I check those boxes? We're big fans of certainly, having cheerleaders who say that where there's a will, there's a way. Treat these as miniature re-implementations and have some sort of incentive to reward the completion of them.
So Scott, just to let you know,
Yep.
we've got, we're at 12:58.
Yep, saw that. And I'll buzz
Okay.
through these next two, and I think we'll be at a good stopping point
Great.
to kick off on Thursday.
Okay.
So the other 2 types of gaps, and Ron hit on one earlier. One is a functionality gap that's structural. And that gets into, and Beth had asked I think Beth had asked the question about acquisitions, or we started a new plant and our system isn't a multi-plant system. We're adding warehouses on the West Coast and we don't have a multi-warehouse system. We need multi-currency or multi-language, or we need different costing methods above our plants. My message here is there's short and intermediate term workarounds, but replacement is inevitable. So you might as well start thinking about retirement planning if you have any of these functionality gaps. And then the last one is the technology gap. And that's where the case of our software just didn't keep up. There's a big long list here of things where you'll just know, I can't connect mobily. And we saw that a lot in the last year. We don't have analytics. I can't send data to Excel real well. It works slow when I log in from my house. Same thing here. The solutions tend to be stopgap. There's a number of them listed here and be happy to go over with, in more detail with you, as a one-off. But again, if the gaps are technological or structural, there's not a lot that can be done unless an upgrade provides them. So, and then, that'll lead us into kind of next week's session, which I'll kick off with the end of it, is sometimes modernizing can increase adoption and utilization. I don't know about all of you, but I'm technically a baby boomer born in late '64. And, I'm comfortable with green screens because that's what I learned on. But the millennials in the workforce today, shudder when they see those kind of screens. They want to see browser-based systems that they can pull up on their phones, or Windows tiles like Windows 11. And so we have been seeing that a lower training curve and greater adoption as in the more modern systems. And so that is a reason, while we don't shill for any vendors, that is a reason to contemplate it might be time to upgrade. So, this is where we can go through the ERP improvement roadmap as the beginning. And then for those that, if we can call it a day here, and then when you come back on Thursday, we'll start from here, and then we'll get into the selection side that Buck, I think, had suggested.
Very good. And Scott, for Tom, I do want to thank you. And
Sure.
And I thought this was very appropriate. My personal experience has been that I never was on a team where we replaced an ERP system that wasn't working.
Right.
And I wish we would have had this tool to prove it to someone, so we didn't go through the hardship of getting something new. But I hope it was a good session for everyone here. Definitely look forward to you coming back on Thursday, especially for those of you who like to know more about the selection of a new ERP system, or if you've never had one, that type of thing. So thank you again, Scott.
Thanks, Ron.
And thanks for the support from Team Neo. Thank you, everyone, for attending. And we hope to see you again in a couple of days.
Great. Thank you very much. See you Thursday.